And without further ado, allow me to introduce Judge Ken Stoner. Judge Stoner oversees Oklahoma County's treatment courts and remerge female division. Oklahoma County is in the top 1% largest treatment courts in the United States. Judge Stoner is a sixth-generation Oklahoma and a member of the Cherokee tribe. One of his goals is to help transform Oklahoma from being known for its high incarceration rate to becoming known for strength and skill of its diversionary programs. And something that's typically often left out, but is a neat factoid about Judge Stoner. Some of you are familiar with TED and TED conferences, and there's a TEDx Oklahoma City and a TEDx OU. That's possible because of Judge Stoner. Back in 2011, he brought TED into the state and those programs. And in 2001, he was number one in his law class, graduate number one in his class, and number 3 in the nation. Wow. And so we are honored to have Judge Ken Stoner with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys for being here, taking a Friday afternoon and coming down. And Doug, everybody's giving a shout out to Doug, and I can't say enough about his leadership, because that's really what this is about. This is, everybody that's here is a leader in some respect, and everybody that's here on these panels are a leader in some respects. And I believe that our system works well when our leaders can create a framework in which people can be successful. We're responsible, so we can say, well, people aren't doing well. We can look at them and say, well, they're not changing the way they should change. They're not responding the right way. Well, then look at the framework that you've created for them to be successful. If you create a great framework for people to be successful, they will be successful. And that's what I want to talk about. And I think that's this panel will touch on that as well. So I'm going to make a couple different remarks. Doug called me yesterday to make remarks for Mr. Tardy Bono. He's the director of our CJAC, Criminal Justice Advisory Council for Oklahoma County. And it is the kind of ground level view of what's going on in criminal justice right now. Or probably at least I can speak to it in Oklahoma County. I know what's going on in Oklahoma County. And so, well, I'm going to touch on some of his. He provided this to me, the CJAC report. And if you can hit maybe see the next slide there. Go. Boy, you can't see it very good, can you? So a couple things about Oklahoma County, really one of the best barometers of what's going on. And there's really a lot of very interesting things going on. And I'm quite hopeful and optimistic of all the changes, even though there's still a lot of work to be done, that we're making a lot of progress. The Criminal Justice Advisory Council is a group of community leaders, our elected officials, our DA, our state director of mental health, our county commissioners, our court clerk, our DA, our public defender. We all get together every other month, and we talk about how it is that we can increase communication, and what do we need to change, and what do we need to do differently. And it kind of struck me. I'm a judge in Oklahoma County. I've been there since 2018. Whenever I became a judge in 2018, they printed me some business cards. And so the business card that they gave me in 2018, I thought, well, this is interesting. Why isn't my email address on here? And they're like, well, that's just the way we've done it for a long time. This is just the business card that we make for everybody. And we just have your phone number on there and your name. I was like, well, can I get one with my email address? No, we don't really, that's not what the format is. That's what the template is. And so, it's kind of an example of why it's so critical that we've got to put fresh eyes on what we're doing, the fresh eyes on our processes and our systems, and maybe look at them a little differently, because it might be important to have emails on your business card, and that's just that is, like I said, that's maybe an example of just we tend to be creatures of momentum, and this CJAC committee is really focusing on what it is we got to do. What do we have to do differently? What do we have to change? And of course, many people, if you're from our community, you know the woes of the Oklahoma County Jail. The good news is there is a lot of progress. I mean, despite that we are still having some setbacks from time to time. The jail population has really the record low for probably a decade. Like this right here is 2004. 2,100 people. 2009, this is the averages, about 2,600 people. 2015, and you can see now for the last couple of years here, we've now cut our jail population down to around an average around 1,600 is the average daily. So that really is quite a bit of progress. And as we're learning, jail is actually very appropriate for some people. Some people actually don't do well in jail. It's not really a good environment. They come out just a little bit worse than they went in. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. But we're making progress on that front. Now, here's another kind of ground floor. These are receptions from the top slide. There is Department of Correction receptions from Oklahoma County. And so you can see the blue is 2018, went down in 2019 and 2020. So we're sending fewer people to prison from Oklahoma County. So that's good. Now, the one thing that we don't know, really, this is just kind of raw data, is this is also during COVID, 2020. So I'm optimistic that this holds. But we also know during 2020, DOC wasn't transporting a lot of people. So I'm not really sure exactly how that affected it. But we are making significant progress in our diversion programs, which the panel will talk about. And some other things that might, I don't know how helpful necessarily. Inmates booked in by race. And then down here is booked in by gender. We have about 75% men, 25% women in our Oklahoma County Jail. Next is just some of the leadership changes. Our Oklahoma County jails have been taken over by a trust, and they've hired an administrator. It's no longer really called the jail. It's called the Oklahoma County Detention Center. And they're putting fresh eyes on all the processes top to bottom and making a lot of, we'll say, positive changes. This is the emblem for our detention center. And they've even put a lot of thought into the little buffalo there because it's a character of strength and resilience. And something that's kind of on the that's starting to be very relevant in Oklahoma County is the diversion hub, and it was kind of the brainchild of a number of community leaders that got together, but primarily Sue Ann Arnall, that had a heart for how is it that we work with justice-involved individuals and help divert them from prison, because whenever you're in custody, there is something seriously wrong with your life. If you wake up one day and you're wearing handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit, something has gone terribly wrong. And it's usually addiction of some kind. That's a very prominent issue, of course, and I'll get to that in a moment. Mental health issues and you're not at your best. And so the criminal justice system is quite, it's layered, it's complex. You got places you got to go, people got to see, probation officers you got to visit. If you're on probation, court costs that you got to make sure you pay. You've got to be at court at certain times. And it can be, for some people, really overwhelming. And you can go to the diversion hub. It's kind of like a one-stop shop where it's a nonprofit that under one roof it's a nonprofit that houses other nonprofits, where other organizations in the community that want to intersect with justice-involved individuals help them get support for things like housing, access to benefits, access to education, access to childcare, all the things, addiction treatment, under one roof. Everything's under one. They have a van that kind of travels from the courthouse to the jail to the diversion hub, and it's just always looping. So trying to remove some of the transportation barriers. Previously, people that have been justice involved, if you wanted help, you might get a guide of 15 different places in the community, and you got to figure out how to get yourself there. I'm telling you, most of the people, a lot of them don't have driver's license. They don't have transportation. I was on a panel one time with our former chief of police, Bill City, and somebody asked about rehabilitation. And he commented, he said, really this isn't about rehabilitation for a lot of them. It's about habilitation. They've never been habilitated ever. I mean, the way when they started when they were 14 years old is when they first started using methamphetamine. Or they were born to parents that had mental illnesses, or they were born up in the foster care, and they kind of end up aging out. And so there's a lot of them that when you really get to know their story and really pull back the layers, understand what's going on. And some people do need rehabilitation, but a lot of them, we really got to just work on the basics and just start with habilitation. I think I really predict that 10 years from now, hopefully sooner, that people will be flying in from all over the country to come see what we've done here in Oklahoma County, and specifically like the diversion hub and what OSU OKC is doing, and a lot of other innovation that's happening right now around this population. So diversion hub, one of the line items on our MAPS 4 allocated, I think, $18 million in MAPS 4 money to actually build the building for the diversion hub. And so I think that's still several years away. They're also going to build a Palomar building too, which is a family justice center. So great stuff to look for the next decade. Let's see what else he's got here. One other thing that is that Tim Tardy-Bodo and the CJAC is trying to help organize, I've been a part of it myself, is looking at, how do we lower the population in the jail? And we've created what they call a high utilizer task force. And so we went through and looked at, who is going to the jail, who's going in there, who's going there over and over again, and what's going on. And they identified, when we did a little research, we found 1,100 people that had, in the last 3 years, have been booked in the county jail 6 times or more. 1,100 people booked in the jail 6 times or more. And the vast majority of them are in their offenses that are not serious enough to actually send them to the Department of Corrections. They're in there just misdemeanors time and time and time again. And so we're having conversations with North Care and creating a task force around how it is that we target these high utilizers, people that are really high mental health, high need in terms of addiction, and work with them and partner with them and make sure they've got the right amount of resources. One thing that most of you in here probably know because you're here, but we have to let the community know that your past does not have to equal your future. Okay, people tend to do about as good as they can with what they got at the time. And so when you take the time to realize that it help people have their needs met, people tend to do well when their needs are met. If their needs are being met, then they do well. Now, this is not rocket science, but it is hard work. But we are developing a skilled team between the Diversion Hub and, again, all the professionals up here as well. With OSU, OKC, Remerge, amazing program. I do want to let you know, we got a $500,000 grant from the Bureau of Justice Assistance. It's $500,000 over 4 years to start a veterans treatment court. There's actually with Tinker Air Force Base and the base at Lawton and Altus, there's a lot of military here, a lot of retired military and a lot of military presence here. And we're finding a large number of veterans going to prison. And with our Veterans Treatment Court, right now we've got about 46, mostly men, but a few women. The primary issue coming in is addiction, but I also see a lot of PTSD, a lot of sometimes even service-related mental health issues. Anyways, so far so good. We've got training from Justice for Vets out of Washington D.C. that's helped us create this court, and I'm really proud. Probably right now we have 46 veterans that would be going to prison if it weren't for this program. And right now we are working on expanding our drug court and our DUI court, treatment courts, our mental health court. We do have a new judge for our mental health court. That's Judge Burton. She'd previously been in the DA's office, and now she's in our mental health court. Ground Zero, Oklahoma County. I'm not sure if you want to have any comment really on what else was going on in Oklahoma County on Ground Zero. Kind of an overview there. The thing that that is puzzling. Some of the people that are in the jail and the people that are involved in our criminal justice system, most of them aren't particularly lovable. And they're, when they're in their addiction and whenever they are, they're not a particularly sympathetic population. But that said, they are members of our community and they're there when they're not at their best, and their past does not have to equal their future. And so we got to kind of learn to set some of this aside and recognize this is what this is. I've been inspired by a gentleman named Brian Stevenson. He's an author. There's a movie called Just Mercy. I don't know if you've heard about it. That I had the good fortune of meeting him and hearing him speak a few times. He has a TED Talk out there if you want to see Brian Stevenson, BryanStevenson. Brian says that if you want to solve a problem, you got to get close to it. If you want to solve a problem, you got to get close to it. And, there's that dynamic tension. I mean, who really wants to get really close to somebody who's wrapped up in addiction, somebody who's really suffering from mental health issues, somebody who's justice involved and they've just committed a bunch of crimes. They've just stole some cars and they've just pawned items that don't belong to them. And we've got to figure out how to just set that aside. I mean, I'm not saying set it aside. People still can be held accountable. Matter of fact, the accountability a lot of times is what helps them heal. But they don't really need to be in prison. There's so many people that end up in prison that would actually be better off, and our communities would be safer if we figure out how to address their underlying needs, help them either rehabilitate or habilitate, and help them stabilize with employment, whatever education needs, housing, and they thrive and they do well. And the folks that were up here a while ago are great examples of that. So I'm going to pivot from here to a couple remarks as we go into the panel. I'm going to make some remarks about addiction. And so if you might mind putting that slide up. I think it's worth really spending just a few minutes because I started my career as a prosecutor. I was in the Oklahoma County DA's office, and I was really, really surprised at the number of cases that I had. Every case, I mean, whether it was a stolen car case or stolen property or a forgery or sometimes even violent assaults, how many of them, the underlying issue was substance use, abuse, and addiction. And so I'm in charge of the case, prosecuting this case, and you can see what the offense is, but the underlying issue looks like it's substance use, abuse, or addiction. Coming out of law school, I don't know if you know how many classes you get on addiction in law school. 0. Also, within the culture of the office, at least at the time, I used to work here with Matt Ballard, and I, back in the early 2000s, and addiction at that time, we really thought it's just bad people doing bad stuff. That's what this is. It's just bad people doing bad stuff, and they need to go to prison. And if you want to clean up the community, you got to make sure our community is safe. You got to take these people, make sure they go to prison. That was really kind of the way you thought about things. And you might have a little bit of sympathy for somebody because they had it looks like an addiction issue. Well, I guess you'll get better in prison. That has been kind of the culture for a long time. And even though I thought, there's got to be a better way, it seemed kind of sad, but that's just the way it is, right? That's the way your business card gets printed. That's just the way that it is. After I left there, I went into private practice. I was doing entertainment law. I was doing corporate law. I started doing a little bit of criminal defense work where I was representing people that had addiction issues that were tied up in the criminal justice system. And I really got to know who these people were and tried to help them. And I've met a lot of people that really, really wanted to get sober and just didn't know how. And so this is, to me, it's like if you leave here with one thing, we have to figure out this puzzle of addiction. It's not what you think it is for most people. It's a little more layered and more complex. So I actually, I created my own survey. I went to Oklahoma County and I surveyed all the judges and all the DAs and the defense attorneys that I could get. And I said, in your opinion, what's the percentage of cases in our county that substance use, abuse, or addiction is a relevant factor? And what I got was 75% of all of our criminal cases. If you go down to the first floor where we have child custody cases, about 50% of all the child custody guardianships, substance use, abuse, or addiction is a relevant factor. we have really good data on this. This is not survey data. This is 83% because DHS tracks this very closely. 83% of children that go into DHS custody are there because the home is unfit due to substance use, abuse, or addiction. So now, remember all the lawyers that work over there. Remember how much training we get in addiction? None. Judges that handle these kind of cases, really especially through the 2000s and really probably till very, very recently, continuing education classes for lawyers and judges in the year 2018 was zero. You had to go to a specialty conference. You had to actually want to try to seek something out and go watch some videos somewhere. You don't go to a state conference. You don't go to a state bar conference. We don't understand this. And so, and I'm going to tell you, unless you understand this, it's really difficult to bring resources to bear to make a change if you think it's just bad people doing bad stuff. Okay. So that's why I'm going to take a couple minutes to kind of walk through. This is about an hour presentation. I'm going to do it in 10 minutes. Okay. So right now in Oklahoma, we do have crisis level of incarceration. Fortunately, that is going down. But it doesn't tend to work well. I don't know if you guys know the Department of Corrections budget's about $600 million a year. And you got to ask yourself, how's that going? And that's not even enough. If you ask them, it's like, that's not enough. And they got a big about it. I mean, I don't know what the right number is. I just know that's a lot. And I also know that it's very expensive and it's pretty inefficient. And so as we've had some of our panelists here, thank you very much. What we find out when I say inefficient, that on average, people come out just a little bit worse than they went in. Okay. Prison tends to be a graduate school for criminality. So, one of the functions that we work with are people that have a little bit more antisocial. That means they don't mean they have a personality disorder. That means they don't really aspire to be rule followers. they don't aspire to be law-abiding citizens. Matter of fact, they look for ways around that. And so, I don't know most of you in here, but if you would introduce me to 5 people that you hang out with the most, I could tell a lot about how you are. So you send somebody to prison for 3 or 4 years, they're going to come out a little bit more like the people they just spent in the cell with. And so they come out just a little more antisocial than they went in. So it tends to make low-risk people worse. It tends to have no effect or negative effect on high-risk people. They come out just a little bit better. And I think I do talk about here in a minute, a bell curve. This isn't reflective of everybody because there are exceptions to that, but that's why I use the word tends to. It does not cure or treat addiction or mental illness. One thing that's people get confused about, I mean, if you have diabetes before you go to prison, you'll probably, people don't argue with that. Well, you'll probably have diabetes when you get out, right? I'm telling you, if you're schizophrenic before you go to prison, you're going to be schizophrenic when you get out. If you're an addict before you go to prison, you're going to be an addict when you get out. And so unless you really have access to meaningful treatment, which a lot of times it also means support and encouragement, community, jobs, 93% of people who go to prison come back into the community to live with us. Okay. So there are a lot of people that kind of approach this from looking at, well, how do we help other people? That's a great, wonderful motive. There's also another motive here is what if you're particularly selfish and you just want to live in a safe community? You need to be paying attention to this because if you just want to live, I don't really care about those people. I just want to live in a safe community. Then pay attention because this affects you. I try to explain to people like there's a lot of here that if you just focus on just your own enlightened self-interest, pay attention. This really does affect you, whether you really want to help people or not, because these people come back and they live with us. And you have to ask, who do you want as your neighbor? They are members of our community and they are us. What do we got to do? We got to check our biases, understand that this is a very evolving field. Brain science is advancing at record levels. Neuroscientists now know more about neurochemistry. It is mind-boggling and it changes weekly of what we're learning. So we have to be dynamic. We have to be innovative. We have to be always asking, okay, what do we need to be doing next? What are we looking at? How can this technology, the research is coming out, how can we use that? How can we incorporate it? And we also have to do more of what we call 0 to 1 innovation. 0 to 1 innovation is a concept that was created by a guy named Peter Thiel. He's a billionaire Silicon Valley investor. He was Elon Musk's first partner in PayPal. And he wrote a business book. It's called 0 to 1. So it's a book about business. But if you look at the principles that are embedded in the book, they really apply to us. And what he says is that a lot of times people are making products or technology where you take an existing product or technology and you try to make it incrementally better. I'm going to add a little something extra to it. And you take a product that's a 6 and you make it a 7. You take an idea that's a 9, you make it a 10. And he said, that's not what we need to do. What we need to do is we need to break it all down. And we need to go all the way back to 0, to first principles. What are we trying to accomplish? What are our goals here? That's why Michael's asking, what is justice? What is that? What are we really trying to do here? What are the resources we got available? And let's do 0 to 1 innovation. Let's start from the beginning of what we're trying to accomplish. Let's look at the tools that we got available, the resources we got, and let's rebuild this. And we have to have a little bit more thinking around criminal justice in this area. And I'm not saying we tear the prisons down necessarily, because I mean, that's, there's a lot of people that are in prison that are dangerous, but most of them that are there don't need to be there. And there's other better ways of doing it. So, this is one of my favorite quotes here. It ain't what you don't know that gets you. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. There's a lot of people that I meet, judges or prosecutors, like, well, judge, this is how it is. I'm like, no, it's not. As a matter of fact, that kind of thinking has got us in trouble because I tell you, I do this every day, and there's a lot of stuff I don't know. And when you start realizing you don't know the answer, when you start pulling back the layers, it becomes a lot more interesting. Now, I'm not saying this is the easy answer club because this is real work here. But bell curve, so you might hear me make some remarks. Some people say the judge doesn't know what he's talking about because I know a person that doesn't fit that category. Great, yeah, they're over here. Some people. This is most people, okay? So everybody can be exposed to the same stimulus. We have a variety of responses. And so we need to understand like how most people respond. And 20 years ago, this was an article that was published that for the first time, after about 20 years of research, this came out in the year 2000, Addictions of Brain Disease. And this really, and what they discovered is that it actually rewires the architecture of your brain. If you've been wrapped in addiction, your brain's wired differently. And there's some really brilliant people that said, look, this looks like a disease to us. There was a little bit of pushback. There's a group of other neuroscientists that says, well, this is a guy named Mark Lewis. He's very bright, and I've read all of his stuff. He does make some pretty compelling arguments. He said, well, it's not a disease, really, because it's not a little bit, Alzheimer's, that's a disease. You can't cure that with incentives and sanctions, but you can addiction. Makes some good arguments. However, what people get confused about is these are nerds arguing about, is it a disease or is it a disorder? Is it a disease or a disorder? There is absolutely no agreement among anybody that really understands addiction that there is a lack of meaningful choice, and it's best solved by compassionate treatment. Whether you want to call it a disease or disorder, people are usually surprised to find out that I am not evangelical about trying to convince anybody it's a disease. I don't know what it is. I read what the science says, and I said that, the disease argument tends to be more persuasive, but we might know more in 5 years from now. I don't know. But this is what we do know. These are people with broken brains. 4 C's of addiction: compulsive use, loss of control. I like to dial in on this one: continued use despite harm. If you're still using despite harm to yourself, that's a really good indicator this is addiction. Okay. And by the way, the person who's in addiction is not very good at figuring this out. They're not the ones that are like, no, there's no problem here. But if you could notice that in the cravings, this is how much alcohol that Americans drink per week. And it's broken down by percentiles. And if you'll see, about 10% of our population, 30% here, they don't drink at all. We got about a third of us that drink a little bit. And if you go all the way up to the very top, you got about 10% we drink about 2 drinks a night. And we got about 10% of us drink 73 drinks a week. It's about 10 drinks a day. Could be 2 Long Island iced teas, be 3 or 4 huge pours of wine. So my question is alcohol addictive? It's a trick question because it is for these people, but it really isn't for these people. And I really think that we put way too much emphasis on the chemical hooks in the compound. It's the alcohol. Actually, a better question is, what is it about alcohol if alcohol maybe isn't the problem, maybe alcohol is the solution to the problem for about 10% of the people. They have a problem that alcohol, they're trying to fix with alcohol. So what's different about that 10% or maybe that 15% in there? That alcohol is a big deal in their life because they have a problem that they're trying to get fixed with alcohol. And so if you start looking at your substance, whether it's an opiate or a methamphetamine or a heroin, and you're not saying, well, this is the problem. If they just quit using, that would be the problem. No, the substance helps solve the problem that they have. How are they different? What's different about the brains of those folks? Our Surgeon General a couple of years ago did a first ever report on addiction, and by any account, it is the public health crisis of our time. We've got about 93 million Americans that use illicit substances, misuse alcohol, binge drink, and far less than 1% of them get treatment. I was going to brief, this is just a snippet. He just says, past approaches to these issues have been rooted in misconceptions and prejudice. Now is the time to acknowledge that these disorders must be addressed with compassion as preventable and treatable medical conditions. I kind of agree with that. I don't really agree that completely it's a medical condition, because if we just did medical, it'd be really simple that you could just go to the clinic. But if you come to my drug court, we use also behavior modification and not just complete medical. And we got far better outcomes in treatment courts than we do in clinical settings. So, but I like where he's going with that. Just quickly here, if you understand what's going on that 6 inches between your ears, or the ears of somebody that's wrapped in addiction, the midbrain, this little part of the brain right here, is the dominant structure that is controlling the use and the behavior. The part of the brain up here behind your forehead is called prefrontal cortex. That's your higher functioning. That's the part of your brain that makes you uniquely human. That's a part that helps you do executive function, that decides between good, better, and best. It's the part of your morals and values. It's the part of your brain that governs you understanding the future consequence of current behavior. It's also the home of impulse control. It's also the part of the brain that when you look at fMRIs, does not work. It doesn't work well. And so you're always saying, well, you need to quit using, just use your impulse control. If you do an fMRI and a study on the brain with someone addiction, the part of the brain that you want to work doesn't. And so you're wanting somebody to change their behavior when they're not capable of doing it at the time. So, you're really, whenever you're really controlling structure is this middle part of your brain. And so what causes addiction? It's a combination of about 4 things: genetics, early use, trauma, or poor mental health. You're self-medicating the symptoms of mental health. And it could be one of them, could be 2, could be all of them. We all heard about ACEs, exposure to childhood trauma. We are exposed to a lot of trauma, stress of the kids, like PTSD for kids. We know that when you have adverse childhood experiences, it leads to disrupted neurological development, adoption of high-risk behavior, and a lot of other things like addiction. And so I don't know anybody that chooses to have ACEs. Genetics play a huge role. 50%, matter of fact, of addiction is tied to genetics. Genetics do not cause addiction. They cause a susceptibility to addiction. So that's why some people, when they have a drink, they respond differently. And so if I have a drink, I can say, well, I can stop. I don't know why you can't stop. That's almost like saying, because people sometimes, their genetics, they process the substance differently. It spikes their dopamine a little differently. It anchors the behavior a little differently. And for someone to say, look, I can stop and you can't, it's almost like saying, I'm not lactose intolerant. You should be lactose intolerant. I can eat peanuts. Why can't you eat peanuts? For some people, that is the deal. Teen use wires the brain for addiction. The earlier you use, the more likely that you are to become an addict. Matter of fact, we know that kids start drinking at 15. 40% of them become, at 15, 40% become alcoholics. We start drinking at age 15. If you wait till you're 21, it's 7. And part of what's going on here is a lot of the brain development is going on here. If you enter a mood-altering substance during this green window here, when the brain's developing, it kind of anchors the brain in addiction. And whether or not, and God help us if any of us are really judged by our worst decisions. We were 14 or 15 years old. It says a lot more about your environment that you grew up in, your parents, the neighborhood that you were in, that frankly kids don't choose. So what is addiction? It's actually layered. So if you look at what we just covered, genetics, mental illness, learned behavior, it means early use. Addiction underlies that. So if you look in the blue, not everybody that has a mental illness becomes an addict, but everybody that is an addict in addiction may have an mental illness or a genetics, or it was learned behavior, or it was trauma. And so just because you have the trauma doesn't make you an addict. But if you are an addiction, you've got one of those underlying four things, or sometimes all four. And I want to point out, I don't know anybody that chooses their genetics. I don't know anybody chooses to have a mental illness. I don't know anybody that chooses to have childhood trauma, or they don't really choose. I mean, when we think about choose, God help us, we're judged for our worst decisions when we were 14. As I say, learned behavior. So recovery is not just possible. It is probable and predictable if you follow a path. It is not easy. It is often a progress of 2 steps forward, 1 back. Another thing I'd like to emphasize here is that people think this is about stopping using, sort of. Not really. It's a systems issue. Addiction is a systems issue. So you've got to have safe, stable, sober housing. You need to have healthy relationships, positive peer associations, physical health, employment, meaningful work, spiritual development, sense of citizenship, belonging in the community, sober fun. You need to learn how to have fun sober, meaning and purpose, healthy habits, mood regulation. And so think about it like being stuck. This is my artwork. I'm sorry. I didn't draw it. I sold this off the internet, but I put all this little words in the windows of the car. So think about being stuck in a traffic jam. You're the person over here in the corner with a substance use disorder, and you're trying to go that way, but you're stuck in a traffic jam and your substance use is blocking you. Well, we need to get the substance. Anybody been stuck on I-40 when like 4 lanes of traffic and it's like a mile deep? Well, you think about being stuck in traffic and your substance use is the car that's in front of you. Just go ahead and pull that out of the way. Well, how are you going to get out of the way? You got to make the car in front of that go, and you got to get the car in front of that one to go, and you got to get that other one moving. And so when you think about addiction as a systems issue, and it's not just like a one thing issue, it takes, you really kind of got to get at the front here is you got to surrender, maybe get some job training, skill development, employment, mental health, peer associations, medication, access to treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy perhaps, and you got to get the traffic moving. You got to get the traffic flowing, and all of a sudden the addiction can get out of the way. And that's why it takes a team, and when people that we work in diversion, it's not just like one thing. It's really trying to tap into all of this as a systems issue to get the traffic moving again. I oversee our mental health court, our drug and DUI court, and our veterans court. It's a 18 to 36 month long program. We work on problem solving. So we have all of our professionals in our program, our lawyers, our probation officers, our treatment providers. We all work together to try to solve problems. We're just trying to get the traffic moving for our folks. Right now, we do have a lot of encouragement, support for the behavior we want, and we do give sanctions to kind of correct the behavior, really small sanctions that can become incremental if you don't change your behavior. And we can change behavior. We can change behavior better with a handful of 5 or 10 small sanctions that people can change going to prison for 3 years. I mean, it's remarkable that sanctions targeted at the time that the infraction is going on, coupled with support and encouragement, so you get the traffic going and then get them right back on track. So right now, in order to get in the program, in order to even qualify for treatment court, you've got to have failed normal probation usually multiple times or been to prison once or twice before, and you come back yet again. And so the only people we take are people that other people called hopeless. And we have an 84% graduation rate in Oklahoma County. I'm really proud of that. Statewide, it's about 65%. And like I said, this is not rocket science, but it is hard work. But I'm really encouraged by what's going on, this conversation and everybody on this panel that I think about Oklahoma, and we were like created in a land run, like overnight, Oklahoma City became like a city from 0 people to 10,000 overnight. We were like the frontier. We're doing some really cool stuff here in Oklahoma County, and this really is the frontier. And everybody that's at this table, we're all involved in the same kind of problem solving. And you got to accept the fact this is not the easy answer club. Still got a long ways to go, but we got to keep coming together like this, having these conversations. Meta study says if you've got a treatment court diversion programs in your community, It really lowers your crime rate on average about 10%. So like the average, this is a meta study, a study of studies that studied the effectiveness of drug courts. On average, you got about a 10% reduction in your crime rate if you have a good treatment court. We look at a lot of different, there's 8 different factors that we measure. There's some things that we can change, some things we can't change. We cannot change your criminal history. Everything else is changeable. It is dynamic. They call that criminogenic needs, and we target that. And so when I say that people tend to do well when their needs are being met, this is the type of behavior that we're targeting, and we come up with solutions to how it is that we address each one of these types of behavior. And to give you an example of what I mean by when people's needs are being met, if people have outbursts in my courtroom, if they're treating people, having outbursts with staff, our conversations isn't so-and-so's an a-hole. It looks like Tim is having difficulty having his needs met. He's having difficulty communicating because he can't communicate rationally. He has to yell at people. And if you can step away from that, when somebody's misbehaving that's not supposed to be, and go, man, I don't like that guy. He just yells and screams when he doesn't get his way. Yeah, he's unskilled at getting his needs met. We have to teach him a better way of interacting. And if you do that, it works. So every dollar invested in drug court, you get about a $4 return on that. I don't know, anybody getting a 400% return on their IRA right now? No? Okay, sorry. The cost about $20,000 a year to incarcerate somebody, about $5,000 a year to treat them. This is what I call a one-question IQ test, okay? What should we be doing more of? In Oklahoma County, this is 2018, saved about $20 million, 1,000 years in prison, 126 graduates. People can and do change. In fact, it's not just possible, it is probable and predictable, but you have a commitment to skilled implementation of evidence-based practices. I mean, I meet a lot of people say, well, we do evidence-based practices. Like, well, are you good at it? You need to get good at it. You need to become an expert in it. And if you can be good at it, then that's what works. So anyway, there's my personal cell phone number, my email. If I ever do anything for you, let me know. And so let's transition to the panel. How about that? Okay. How can we make, what do you want to do here? You got to introduce everybody here, right?
Introduce everybody real quick, and then I'll hand it back to you. All right. We're going to consolidate some of our bios just a little bit for the rest of the day. So I'm going to run through here quickly. Then we'll go straight into panel questions. So Dr. Joe Ely, Workforce and Economic Development Director at Moore Norman Technology Center, has worked 24 years in education in Oklahoma. 18 of those years were spent working with incarcerated individuals in Career Tech Skills Centers Division. Joe earned a PhD in education from Oklahoma State University in 2012, go Pokes, with his dissertation covering effects of occupational education programs offered by the Oklahoma Department of Career and Technology Education Skills Center Division on the recidivism rate of selected groups of released offenders in Oklahoma. Please welcome Dr. Joe Ely. Daria Siri serves, as Vice President of Student Experience at Oklahoma State University, Oklahoma City, and is co-founder of the Center of Social Innovation. He earned his bachelor's degree in hotel and restaurant administration from OSU in Stillwater, and he earned his master's degree in adult learning with a concentration in organizational development from the University of Memphis. Over the past few years at OSU OKC, Dar has had the privilege to learn from and serve with people from many underrepresented groups, including single parents, the homeless, and the foster community. He has worked with organizations including Remerge, Pivot, and the Curbside Chronicle. Dar lives in Tulsa with his wife and 2 brilliant daughters who attend OSU in Stillwater. Go Pokes. Welcome, Dar Usiri. I hope you're noticing a trend here. The SEC doesn't care about people. Too soon? Jenna Morey was named the Executive Director of Remerge of Oklahoma County in June 2020. Prior to joining Remerge, she served as Vice President of Workforce Development for Goodwill Industries of Central Oklahoma. Recently, Jenna was selected by Governor Stitt to serve on the Governor's Council for Workforce and Economic Development, the statewide Workforce Development Board under the Federal Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Jenna holds Bachelor of Arts from the University of Oklahoma and a Master's of International Affairs from the Graduate Institute of International and Developmental Studies in Geneva, Switzerland. Please welcome Jenna Morey. Jamie Yarborough. Since 2018, Jamie has been in recovery from her personal journey through the justice involvement. She is presently the Employment Development Specialist for Work Ready, Oklahoma. As she finishes her degree to become a drug and alcohol counselor, she helps clients in SNAP, TANF, and reentry populations on a day-to-day basis and sees the barriers they face. Please welcome Jamie Yarborough. Okay, so our topic of our panel here is how can we make diversion and reentry more of a success in Oklahoma? We heard about a good trajectory we're on. How can we pick up on that? So Dr. Ely, let me start with you. When should reentry efforts start?
Well, I think that's the moment that they make contact with our law enforcement professionals. A lot of the reasons they're in that situation mean they've hit rock bottom at that point in time. That's the time that we start to build these people back up. And we do that by treating them with respect, with dignity, and we immediately begin that case treatment plan at almost first contact. And we start to deal with the individual when we first come in contact with them. That should follow them all the way through their incarceration status. Toward the end of their sentence, around the last 18 months, when that should really intensify. We should start looking at educational needs to make sure those have been addressed. We talked about the addiction issues that folks had. Those should be addressed. DUIs, being able to get, your license is a very important thing when you get out of the prison system. Being able to drive, have transportation, a place to live. All those things should be included along that continuum from start to finish. And then when folks do discharge from prison, they have to have good places to be. They have to have a good support group around them. They have to be able to engage with individuals that are positive. Like in Doug's case, he's been through that system. He understands what it takes to go through that, be successful, and once released, be successful on the outside. And that's the best person in this room to listen to about what course that someone should take to do reentry in an effective manner.
Jenna, let me ask you a similar question, right? When is it best to start reentry efforts?
I have to completely agree with Joe. I don't know that I have much to add to his answer, other than, we know, as Judge Stoner was talking about earlier, that often this trauma and addiction issues are happening very young in their lives. And we see that happen with reemerge moms. I would say 90% of them have experienced some kind of childhood abuse or trauma. And so they're often stuck in that mentality, and they might not have, as Judge Stoner was talking about, they might be frozen in a mindset of being 15 years old. And so being able to step in when they do first make contact with the justice system and have an early intervention, let's help them early before they ever get to reemerge. Let's help them before they ever are incarcerated and learning more criminal behavior. And I think it's really important for us to shift our thinking about when we're providing help. Reentry is really too late.
Okay, Dar, we're going to shift over to a question about diversion and reentry programs. Should they be generalized or individualized?
Well, from my experiences, the answer is yes. So you must have a macro, so you have to look at the key KPI learning objectives or change. It's all about change. It's about next. And then you look at each individual. My background is a chief experience officer for Hilton Worldwide. So every one of our team members had a personal growth pattern. We use that with neuroscience. We also use that with true data KPIs and Six Sigmas. I may be saying acronyms to you that you don't care about. But these are proven models that go back to individual love, respect, dignity, and growth. And by the way, as I look at you, Christy, and I sit by you, we welcome you to CFSI. And that's the most important thing here. You will also experience the yes to the answer. We have outputs. We have 24 objectives for everyone. But you know what's great? You have your own journey. And I'm not Ariel Moore. Let's be very clear that Ariel Moore is the brand. I'm an old man. And my co-parent to this guy is Brad Williams. Brad Williams, he and I dreamt about this. I know that Tricia has a lot to do with this. There's many people in this room. We're humbled and grateful to be able to experiment and help people change their lives generationally with, yes, macro and individualization. And it's driven by data and metrics. This is not intuition. This is daily measurements that ask the question, how are we doing? Then more importantly, I get to look at Tiffany. She helps us purpose and hope. She's the and. She helps us figure that out. Then I get to look at Charles and what he does with our students and there are clients. These are individuals in our community. And it's individual. Is it individualized, Charles? Absolutely. It's got to be. Everyone's different. God made everyone here differently. We each have an X factor. Our responsibility is to find the X factor with each other and glorify it and support it and love it and just continue to pay it forward. That help?
That's great. That's great. Jamie, let me ask you about maybe coordination of reentry programs, whether it is or could be better centralized or decentralized is best for our reentry programs.
I think that, first of all, I'm happy to be here today. And working at Work Ready Oklahoma, we work with Diversion Hub. I think that is crucial with people reentering. Diversion Hub has, they've got justice system, they've got legal aid, they've got everything there centralized. But each case manager is going to work with that person individually to create a plan. And I like to use the term smart action plan. Create a smart action plan for that person. Mm-hmm. My journey is very different than other people's journey. I've been in recovery since 2018. I kept up a family and worked and still had a professional life, but I had to start over in 2018 when I decided to become a sober person and be a more contributing member of society, a better contributing, I should say. But I think it should be. There should be a centralized data system. I think when they're coming out of incarceration, I think it would be great to have a data system that just shoots over their information to Diversion Hub or to the place where they could fit the best. So by the time they get there, they're ready for them. They're ready to take them on and love them up and help them in the ways that they need to be helped.
Judge Stoner, let me ask you on kind of a couple of these questions and what you've heard coming forward and based on what you talked about just a moment ago about when reentry efforts start and programs individualized, centralized, how do we do that? How does that tie in with what you just talked about? What would you say and answer these questions?
Well, sometimes when people hear me talk, I see their eyes roll back and they go, "Oh my gosh, Judge Stoner, everybody needs to be in drug court." And I said, no, not really. But I do believe that everybody that should be in drug court should be in drug court. But not everybody's suitable for drug court. It's really a very specific population that we look at. You got to have a moderate to severe substance use disorder. You got to be nonviolent, and you got to meet a certain criteria. The problem is that systematizing both it's being general and individualized. So you've got to be able to take everybody that's coming in, have them assessed, have them evaluated, and try to determine, okay, this is what the data and the science says would be best for this person, and then try to follow that recommendation. Obviously there's always some adjustments in there. I just believe that everybody there is really a diversion program for most people that would suit them well. They're not all created equal, but we do have good programs. And so, but there actually are a fair amount of people that go to prison, from Oklahoma County just because they didn't get the right screen. They didn't maybe know to go get a screen. And there's really not a generalized process where everybody kind of goes through this one process where everybody's evaluated. Everybody is, it takes a lot of manpower and resources, but you get better outcomes. It's just like we're talking about, you want to pay for it now or pay for it later. And, if we were to do that, now we have such, good teamwork and integration. We can help get people's needs met. When people's needs are being met, they tend to do well.
Jamie, I'm going to come back to you with the same question, but Jenna, I want to ask you about qualifications for diversionary programs.
Sure. I think just going back to what Judge Stoner was talking about, we do have many great programs in Oklahoma. And I like that. I like that not all of these qualifications for getting into different programs are the same. That means we're able to hit more populations and be flexible with who we're serving. So for example, to get into Remerge, you have 2 qualifications. You have to be able to reunite with your minor children. So we only serve mothers, and you have to have a felony charge. And we do that because we can only serve so many people. We would love to, we are almost all privately funded. So we would love to serve more people, but raising enough money to do that is really hard. So this is the population that we've chosen to work with. We serve high risk, high need. So again, those people who would be considered hopeless, they're facing 7 years on average in prison. And instead they come to us and spend about 2 years in our program. And it's a very holistic program, and it's not an easy road to get through our program. But once they do, lives are transformed. And the benefit, I think, to your point of the question about qualifications, the benefit of us serving this particular population is that we can intervene and provide support that directly speaks to mothers' needs. And that allows us to be very specialized in our treatment of this population. We know our population and can provide supports around what those specific needs are. And so I think when we talk about the different options, whether it's drug court, Remerge, team, all those different diversion options, it's a benefit to us to have different programs with different qualifications to get into so that we can serve a broader population specifically to their needs.
Jamie, same question about the qualifications for diversionary programs.
I agree with Jenna. I think that, I think it's really neat, having certain qualifications to get you in, especially with our mothers. I think that is so important. And I know, I work with people every day that are just coming out of incarceration. I'm on the other end as Jenna. So a lot of people that come to us, the only qualification they have to have is have SNAP benefits. And so a lot of the people that we see, I would say about 85 to 90% have had justice involvement. And my job is to help them find a job. So it's inspiring, it's rewarding, but it's really hard sometimes, you know, when these people are coming out, even if it's been 20 years since they've had, you know, had their indiscretion, it doesn't matter. You know, these employers aren't willing to work with them, or, you know, there's few that will. So I think, yeah, like Jenna said, I think qualifications are important, but we work with people that need a job right now. That is our prime target of people. And so, but I do agree with Jenna that I like, you know, the more requirements for certain things. So.
Dar, question for you, and Dr. Ely, I'll come to you with the same question in a second. How successful do you think diversionary programs are as compared to programs while someone's incarcerated?
It depends. It depends on a couple things. Let's be very transparent here. It depends on true leadership. It depends on, do they really care? It depends on, are you measuring it? It depends on, are we reporting back for CIP, which is a continuous improvement process? It depends. So there is not a blanket yes or no from my perspective. From my experience over the last year after our first cohort, and we're getting ready to welcome 31 incredibly brave human beings in 1 week, and we're going to learn more from that than ever. But I will tell you this, at the end of the day, it really is about leadership. It's about measurements, and it's about continuous improvement. And it's about personalization. I'm gonna go back to that. It's about personalization. Every human being this is not a number 6. This is not a number 1 at McDonald's. Everyone's different, and you must have the intelligence, the empathy, and the vulnerability to be okay that I'm not you and you're not me. And that's great. And you deserve love, dignity, and more importantly, the purpose and hope of promise to change your family for generations. And that is CFSI's journey. Our objective is to change generational poverty, generational everything. And at the end of the day, it starts with you. It starts with you. And it starts with me. I'm just a servant. I'm just here to help. And we surround the right subject matter experts. And thank you, Donovan, for being here. People that also go to the community, and we find people that deserve second chances, third chances, fifth chances. Who am I to say no to somebody? Nobody. It's not me. If Judge Stoner says this person's valued, the answer is come on in. If Tricia sponsors somebody, the answer is come on in. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but the
That's
answer is, I'm going to go back to your fresh set of eyes. It's very important. The things that many people are doing are broken. I applaud our relationship. Thank you for being a feeder for us. And that's the truth. You feed us individuals that we have the ability to then love a little bit more through education experiences, personalization, and really character building. And at the end of the day, it's about careers. And that is our icing on our cake. And that allows us then to pay it forward to the employers. And that's a whole different conversation we could spend some time on. It's challenging. I'm an employer. I employed thousands of people at one time. But you know what? 40% of my population were people getting second chances. I was in a hot land. I was in the Caribbean. That's where it was. That was my population. And those people performed better than my people coming out of Harvard. So that being said, it really is about the next. And one of the things I'd like to express, and I have a second, the diversion word, it's a word. I think the word we need to be looking at is next. Diversion says we could be going back. The mentality we should be focused on is what is next for this human being. Words count, behaviors counts, and ecosystems count. So that's all of us. And I look at these beautiful people. I look at this gentleman here serving every day, asking the question for him, how can we help him have a better experience and having those conversations? And then more importantly, do we have a place for those individuals to go to? Diversity is critical. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that all of us can agree that must be in everyone's matrix. But also, as Jenna said, we are not Remerge. And she is not CFSI, and we're not team, and we're not pivot, but we are serving people for next chances.
Dr. Ely, same question, and from your bio, you studied this topic in particular. So what do you think?
And I can speak to that with numbers from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. If someone goes to prison, male or female, and they participate in programs, educational programs, vocational programs, drug treatment programs, they have a 25% chance of returning to prison. If they don't, and they just go to prison, they're just housed or warehouses, a term that we used earlier in our discussion, 67% of those folks are going to come back. 2/3 of the people are going to come back if we don't do something. In 1971, I was talking to Representative Humphrey about this a while ago. A representative named Jim Hamilton from Poto, he had a concept that while folks are incarcerated, these people learn a marketable trade skill. This was 50 years ago, that they won't come back to prison when they're released. The man was right, but it's unfortunate that 50 years later, we're still having this conversation about, okay, these programs do really work if we will fund them. And, Ms. Everest, thank you, for being a part of the Department of Corrections now. We need some guidance there. It's not just a warehouse. We can help these folks. We don't need to call them inmates, convicts, skinners, trustees, whatever the words that we've used to describe these people. They're people. When they're in our schools, inside the prisons, they're our students. I've always, had that. I worked at LARC and I worked at Embark. That's Mabel Bassett Assessment and Reception Center and Lexington Assessment Reception Center. And each day I would go down into the lower parts of these institutions, and I would talk with people that had just got to, they called it pull chain when they left the county jail, and they wound up in the prison system there. In 1 week, I talked to a mother at Mabel Bassett, and I talked to her son at Lexington. If we don't do something to change this, more families are going to wind up in prison system just like that. The benefits, I can't talk enough about that. I've seen it over and over in my career. People get out. The return on investment for me, that personal return on investment, was when someone called you and they said, hey, I've got my family back. I'm working. I'm the manager at this business. I own my own business. I'm successful. That made us feel good about it. It wasn't the pay that we did it for. It was to help the people. So thank you. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a few comments onto Joe. I think one of the questions, so if we're comparing, is it better to be have a program while you're incarcerated, or is diversion better? Again, the answer is both. We need to have programs at all. We need to be funding programs at all. Many times people who are incarcerated, there are programs available, but maybe waiting on list for months and months and months to get into any kind of education or program. So I think funding them in general is really important. I will say that diversion has a few upsides, of course, that being incarcerated does not. So we heard Roxana talk about earlier about how when she was in prison, what she really learned there was to become a better criminal. And so when you are in a program, in the fact that you have a program at all while you're incarcerated is great, but you're still in that environment. You're not in an environment of community, of support, of treatment, of hope. You're in a hopeless place, or that can feel hopeless. And so I think diversion offers the opposite of that. That's what we try to be, is the very opposite of incarceration when they come to our program. The other thing I would say is we have better outcomes. So, for example, our reemerges recidivism rate is 4%. The state of Oklahoma's is 14% for women. We are cheaper. It costs way more to incarcerate someone than it does to treat someone. So we have, over the last 10 years, saved the state of Oklahoma $30 million. And then the last thing I would say is, when a parent is incarcerated, their children are 7 times more likely to be incarcerated themselves. 7 times. So we are not, if you can break that cycle of not sending a parent to prison, we're not just affecting that person, we're infecting generations of Oklahomans.
Okay, we've hit critical mass here, team, that we are getting questions, text in. You're doing your job. Well done. But we have limited time. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pivot a little bit, and we're going to do one question, a different question for each of you, kind of as we close out. And so I'm going to start here, Dar. What role do businesses play in the diversion or next, as you said, in the reentry process?
Well, as a past employer of hundreds of individuals that remind me that they are better than me and they came out of incarceration, the employer needs to be open and honest with the landscape of what's available, and then also serving their community for long-term, not short-term. This is not the stock. This is not a quarter by quarter. This is the next 20 years. And that's the decisions it's difficult to think this way. We have to look at LTV, which is lifetime value. It's all about lifetime value. If we're looking quarter by quarter, year by year, that's fine. But it takes years for an individual to recapture their life, to reclaim themselves, to reintegrate. And the employer is a big piece of that. The employer's trust, the ability to change, and also more importantly, it's the ability to motivate other people to know there's purpose and hope out there. There's not enough employers. Now, I saw a sticker in Tulsa the other night downtown, and it said, the sticker was beautiful. Should have took a picture, but I didn't. And the picture was in front of, it was a second chance place, but it says it was supporting, they were an employer that had a big sign that they support second chances. So we have employees out there that are being smart, that just like in a place of, it's a safe place. So there should be more and more employers. Paycom's doing great. There are many big employers. Hilton Worldwide, that's my legacy. That's my retirement. They employ 10% because number one, it's the right thing to do, but that is our society. These people deserve second chances. You know what? Ariel's smarter than me. Tiffany, smarter than me. Don't ever think that these individuals, Doug is a genius. Don't ever, just because they went to prison or they had a moment. I've had many moments in my life. How dare, like you said, the past does not dictate the future. And how dare we as human beings put a limit on someone's capabilities? Because you know what? We're all equal. No offense. We're all in this together. Doesn't matter if you have 4 PhDs or you barely got out of 5th grade. We are all equal to success. We live in America. And more importantly, we all deserve better. And that is what it comes down to. The employer is a key piece to this. I've spoke to Frank Smith at Mosaic about putting on some ongoing workshops for employers so we can educate them when it comes to getting their team ready, mentally, spiritually, and culturally. But you know what? Many of these team members are ready to bring in people because their brother's incarcerated. Their aunt was incarcerated. So I think it's a far stretch for many people, but it really isn't. And that also includes higher ed, banking. I think it goes back to, I heard something earlier, I think it was Judge Stoner. It's relative to the crime. So yeah, you're not going to put a thief in maybe a banking institution, but the answer is, Who says they can't change? Right? Everyone's capable of change. So that is my position as an employer. And at the end of the day, it's all about the community. It's about lifetime value.
This question wasn't directed towards me, but I want to throw my 2 cents in here. So far throughout this forum, I've heard, and this is going to be one of the times where there's going to be differing perspectives here. I don't believe that any of us deserve a second chance. But like I talked about earlier on that paperweight in the gift shop, that right scale of justice is mercy. Mercy is that moment where I don't deserve something, but you give it to me anyways. You know, the things that I've done in my life, I assure you, I don't deserve to be standing here today. I don't deserve to have this beautiful 8-year-old little girl, my beautiful wife. I don't deserve anything but to rot in a prison cell. But society gave me that mercy. They gave me that opportunity that I didn't deserve. And the programs, even diversion after the fact or through reentry, helps me to show society that act of mercy was not wasted on me. So I don't think that any of us, even if you've never offended, to be honest with you, you don't deserve the role that you have in society. The society grants that to you through acts of mercy every single day. Just with somebody like me or somebody like the ladies from Remerge or Wayne, that act of mercy is more displayed to society, but we all walk in that mercy, and we can't forget that it's mercy, not deserving, that makes us who we are.
Well said, Doug. Well said. Dr. Ely, let me jump over to you for last question. We have so many lawmakers that are in the room, and this question was texted in. What would you recommend is one fix to the justice system that you would ask for next legislative session?
Just get one.
Just get one, right? You get to play one card.
Want more money for programs in prison. That way people can we don't have those long waiting lines, waiting lists. I used to get requests to staff letters all the time. We just didn't have room for all the people that wanted in. They want help. They know that the help is there. It's just not that available to them due to lack of funds. That's it.
And fund diversion.
You may be touching on another question that Judge Stoner, maybe you're a good one to ask this. How do we ensure basic reentry needs such as getting a state ID can be addressed prior to release?
Well, that would be, I mean, that is such a simple thing. You think just getting an ID can be such an incredible barrier, even with a skilled team. Like we have a whole team of people, and sometimes it takes us weeks and months to help people get an identification. It is staggering how difficult it is. I have the ability, if you're in a treatment court, there's a law that says that you can help someone get their driver's license back. It doesn't erase the things they have to accomplish. It gives them more time to get it done, but they're heavily supervised from the program. And just getting someone to get somebody on the phone to understand what they've got to do, to be able to make an appointment, to get to their, to their DPS and to go through that process. It is ridiculously difficult. And on top of that, you can talk to 3 different people and get 3 different answers. That is really common. I mean, when you're trying to figure out what I need to get my license back, you can do everything one person told you to do, and you get up, the next thing you know, it's like, no, that's not what you got to do. You got to do something different. And so, but having someone have basics before they're released from prison, identification, have some of those basic things for stabilization, because you can't get a job without an ID. You can't get a job without an ID. Have an ID when you leave prison makes all the sense in the world. So yeah, to me, that's a no-brainer. So.
Jamie, what would you say are the next steps for Oklahoma?
Judge Stoner, that is the biggest barrier. That's the number one barrier for people that are at Work Ready Oklahoma looking for jobs. They'll come in ready to go. I mean, they are, they know what they want to do. They know, what their barriers are. They're ready to meet them. And then we have no IDs, or we have copies of IDs, which are useless on an I-9 form for a job. So I think that we need to work on more trade programs. I completely agree. I came from tech before Work Ready Oklahoma, and I would completely agree that trade programs are essential. And when I was in high school, I went to school at Middell Tech Center and did cosmetology, and that paid for half of my college. And it's something that I'll have forever. You know, these people are being granted a skill that they can use for the rest of their lives and maybe work on their own, maybe not have to have a boss, maybe work, you know, as a welder on their own, or, you know, whatever the case may be. But I think trade's a huge part of it. Give them some education, training.
Jenna, I'll tell you what, close us out with this last question, which will help segue into the next panel. Remerge being a program that had started before as Oklahoma was looking to make a shift from number one in the nation, right, in female incarceration. So what does Oklahoma look like now and the future? What's the trajectory that we're on that you see?
I think the fact that we're here having this conversation is really important and is a totally different landscape than when Remerge the idea was being born about Remerge. I think, as Tricia said, when that group got together and they were creating or talking about creating it, they didn't really even come out publicly and say that they were doing it for a while or become an actual 501c3 nonprofit for a while, because they wanted to be able to show those results and those transformed lives. And so I think the fact that we're here talking about treatment and not incarceration is critical. I think that the fact that we're talking about how do we involve our business community and get them to not only be supporters and employers, but investors in these lives and in these kinds of programs, because they are their workforce. This is their workforce. I think, you know, we are seeing the state recently funded Remerge in a Pay for Success program, and that's the first time we've ever seen the state provide funding for our program. And we provide critical services for our state. And so I think seeing those movements and investments into justice involvement and to recognizing the humanity of these people and investing in their human potential and giving them hope and restoring our community. There is a much bigger conversation about that happening now. And I think we're seeing new and more players be involved in that conversation to create shared solutions.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panel this afternoon.